There was a time in my past where I used to think about every single little bit of money I spent. Every bit of money, and it would cause a bit of anxiety every time I spent that money. Today, that's not really the case, but I used to be a worrier, and I think I want to talk about it today. And there was actually a time, and some of you might relate to this, where I used to log every single piece of expenditure in a spreadsheet. Every coffee, every sort of train ticket, every little expense, I would log in a spreadsheet to make sure I knew where all of my money was going, because I was so worried that at some point I might not have any more, or I wouldn't have enough money to live. And this is a bit of a story today about how leaving Australia has allowed me to free myself from that money anxiety, that money worry, that nagging feeling you have that maybe if I spend this money, I'm not going to get any more, or I'm not going to have enough to replace it in the future, and I might get poor. This isn't a story about how cheap Bali is. We've all seen those stories before. This is a bit different to that. This is about how when you can sort of break that cycle of being worried about money, it can make your life so much better. If this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, I'm Adam. I've been living in Indonesia for 15 years, and I make videos about what life's like over here in Bali. Welcome to the channel. So for me, in the earlier part of my life, money was more of a worry sort of on a daily basis, rather than just being a worry every time I spent money or what have you. It was more something that was ever present, always there in the back of the mind as a little bit of a trigger. And it was a little bit destructive, to be honest. It sort of controlled parts of your life that you really don't want it to control. So the way that I sort of figured out how to control some of that uncertainty, some of that worry that I had, was by starting up a spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet, it was a thing of beauty. You know, I'd learned how to use spreadsheets really well in my sort of office job back in the day, and this complicated spreadsheet, it's got graphs and it subtracted this and it had running tallies and all this sort of stuff, and I could see at a glance where everything was being spent, in what categories, how much money I'd saved, how much money I'd earned, and just everything. It was a thing of beauty. And I got a lot of pleasure out of just inputting all of my expenses in there, and it sort of felt that every time I put an expense in there, I could sort of lock it away and it was okay because it was in my spreadsheet. That was the way I sort of coped with it. And I think most people who have this sort of financial worry come up with some sort of strategy so that their life is just not so miserable. And that was, yeah, having that spreadsheet was just crazy. I mean, when you think back on it, the amount of detail that was in it, the amount of time I used to work on it, I used to do like forecasting on it and everything. It was really weird. As time goes on, you know, that frugality becomes like almost like an armor, your shield from any problems. You're always trying to save money on everything. It becomes sort of a little bit self-fulfilling in some way. You know, having a system like that, there's a bit of pride in it. You can sort of tell people, oh yeah, I track everything, but it's a bit of a burden as well. And as a result, I really never missed any bills, never missed rent, never missed electricity bills or what have you, and sort of worked for me. Like, it really did work getting me through those periods. But not only did it sort of work, I mean, you sort of get attached to the worry as well. You think, oh, if I worry about this enough, I can really manage this. You kind of feel that that worry is really what's keeping things under control. Like when you're in it, that's what you feel like. And if you weren't worrying about it, then everything would be out of control. I'm just going to pop into my favorite coffee shop at the moment here in Sanur in Bali. It's called Series Coffee Roasters, and it's a good one. There was a particular time that I remember really just so vividly. It's when I received a really massive electricity bill at one point, and geez, I had this really deep, strong pit of anxiety in my stomach. You probably felt that before, and although really there shouldn't be a problem with that, although really I could afford it, there wasn't really any logical issue to be worried about really. I was sort of more worried about I was going to drain my savings and that sort of stuff, and because it was so big, it just gave me the worst sort of stress when it really shouldn't have done. And it's really that gap that I think I had a problem with, is the logical brain saying, you know, it's going to be okay, like it's not a big deal. But it's not the logical brain which is sort of operating your whole life, is it? It's like, it's the mind and the heart, isn't it? And then when you take that to the logical next conclusion, it's when you get that slight little hint of anxiety when you just go and buy a simple coffee, like and it's $4 or $5. Well, how much it costs now? $6. Like, when you get a hint of anxiety about that, you know this whole feeling has gone too far and it doesn't really make any sense anymore. And I guess we really sort of need to call it what it is. It's anxiety, isn't it? A lot of us have anxiety. It's this low-level financial anxiety. It's about a specific issue. It's not necessarily rational or logical, but it's there and you can't control it. So I grew up in a proper working class family, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, those proper working class families where you've got, you know, the father working, the mother sort of being the stay-at-home mum, that sort of typical 3-bedroom house type arrangement, quite modest. I grew up without a TV. We didn't have a TV growing up, never had AC. You know, we never ate out for meals. Like, we would go to a Chinese on a birthday or McDonald's if you were lucky on a birthday. That's about it. Like, you really didn't have any food outside the house. We'd have fish and chips very occasionally, or from the local milk bar you might get $1 worth of chips if you're lucky. Like, really, my bedroom growing up, so I grew up in Sydney, but in a colder part of Sydney where the temperature in winter sort of sub-zero overnight quite often. And the bedrooms weren't heated, so you just have, like, I remember the thick layers of blankets you'd have on. I couldn't imagine doing it now, but that bedroom we had was just so freezing cold. But you sort of got over it, and you had to sort of, like, one side of your face would go cold, so you'd flip over in the middle of the night and get that warmed up, and the other one would go cold, that sort of stuff. And I remember as a 4 or 5 year old, I mean, we were quite mobile, me and all of my friends of a similar age, we were very mobile at 4 and 5 years old. Like, we were allowed out on our own, roaming the streets, which is, it sounds ridiculous now, but we did. And what we always used to do is go to another mate's house who had a TV and watch Skippy in the afternoon when Skippy used to be on. And I guess that's just sort of what we did back in the day, but that sort of wires your brain in a certain way to sort of think about money in a certain way, that money is not abundant. And I'm not talking about poverty here. We weren't poor, we were pretty working class, but it's that constant sort of hum in the background that money is finite and you can't just have what you want. Like, it was very limited. And I guess the main takeaway from me from that whole period was that if you don't spend money, you can never fall short. And to be honest, my dad was the main driver of that frugalness. He was the breadwinner. He's now nearly 82, but up until his sort of maybe mid-70s, he was always a little bit sort of funny about money. He never really got over it. He's a little bit over it now, that he's sort of a little bit more housebound now and isn't really spending much anyway, but it really was a big problem for him throughout his whole life, and that probably sort of came from his own upbringing as well. And I suppose that's why I feel a little bit of distance from younger people these days, because I think, you know, if you go back to 70s, 80s, go earlier, of course, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, people growing up in those times had a different sort of relationship with money, whereas I think I can't really sort of relate to younger people these days who grew up with a lot, you know, and for them money's not really that big a stress point. Sometimes when you worry about these things, you feel like you're being responsible, that your worry is quite virtuous. But the thing is, this whole worry thing, it really changes you. And the price that you pay is not really in dollars and cents, it's in other areas of your life. And the one thing that I really regret about sort of this whole skimping thing, this worry about money thing, is that in my 20s, I probably didn't travel as much as I should have done or wanted to do. I mean, I did come to Bali fairly regularly in my 20s, but that was my only outlet, you know, and I sort of wish that I could have sort of ditched my job for a period of time, maybe even had sort of like leave without pay or taken an extended break and gone more extensively around the world. Really, I think you have your best experiences when you're younger on that sort of travelling backpacker thing. Now, of course, I've done that subsequently as an older person, but I just wish I'd sort of got into that a little bit earlier for it to be more of a fuller part of my life rather than being something that sort of happened in my 30s, 40s and later on in life. Just ordered a coffee here at Ceres. Here's Ken. Ken's the owner of this place. Look at this coffee. That's a beautiful one, Ken. How are you going?
Good.
Ken is, if you don't know, Ken actually lived in Australia for how long, Ken?
For 18 years.
18 years. Is that longer in That's longer in Australia.
Longer in Australia than here. Yeah.
So he's more Aussie than Indonesian, but he's back in Indonesia now. He's set up this coffee shop, and he does the best Aussie style coffee. What would you call it? Aussie style?
Like Aussie style, I reckon.
Aussie style, but Indo beans.
Indo beans, yeah. Indo beans.
So if you want that Aussie style coffee with Indo beans, come to Series. He's great. So getting back to the story, I guess that's what the opportunity cost is, isn't it? If you're a bit of a worrier and a bit of a scrimper and saver, the opportunity cost is some of those years in your younger life. There's probably a range of other things as well, but for me, those years in your younger life that are sort of frittered away a little bit because you're trying to save money for a rainy day that really never eventuates. And the cruel irony of all of that is that, you know what, I think I could have probably afforded to do that back in the day. That's the real regret. You know, you're worrying, it's not real. That's not a real issue. You know, it's somehow the emotional part's getting in the way of the logical part in a lot of ways. And the point of that is that what you're really, the bill here is not that you're losing money or you're saving money or whatever. The bill is that you're losing moments, losing points in time. And as time goes by, those moments that you sort of frittered away, they become a lot more valuable. All right, let's move on. Busy little place, that Series Coffee Roasters, because it's so good. The thing about this whole worry thing is that as the years went on, that worry never really went away. No matter how much my finances changed, the worry level stayed the same. And there's a bit of an indicator there that it's a bit ridiculous when, you know, your financial position might improve, but the worry's still there. And at some point, that whole worry thing stopped becoming just a response to fear of going bankrupt and just sort of like a default position, some sort of default reflex thing that you're always going to have, a part of your identity almost. And that whole thing about I'm careful with money is no longer rational. It's just part of who you are and what you like to boast to people that, oh, I'm really careful with the money, I'm really good with money, I save money and all that sort of stuff. It becomes, you know, something that you repeat often to people, part of your identity. And I think once it gets to that point, it's sort of a bit of a problem. I was sort of thinking about when I was back in the office back in the day, one of my co-workers, I remember it so vividly. She said, "You're as tight as a fish's bum." And I thought that's a bit crass. She was right, of course, but at the time I thought I'm just normal, you know. But after that, I sort of wore it as a badge of honour. Every time I'd see her, I'd sort of wear that whole tightness thing as a badge of honour with her, and we joked about it and stuff. But there's actually something pretty serious behind that. Is that, you know, my sort of worrying thing wasn't really normal, you know. You can sort of feel the disconnect between the way I handle money and the way everyone else handled money. That's not normal to do it like that. Yeah, I think it becoming part of your identity is a little bit dangerous, and you sort of need to figure out how you're going to change from that. And I think the big trap in all of this is that you cannot out-earn the worry. You can't really start getting massive pay rises and think that this whole thing's going to go away. It doesn't go away from earning more money. That's the thing I think that I sort of fell into, because as I earned more money and became more comfortable and it became less rational to worry about money, you know, the worry thing still stayed the same. The thing that sort of broke it for me is understanding what that whole worry thing is about, that whole anxiety thing is about. And it's like a threat detector. Now, anxiety is your body's natural mechanism to try and prevent you from danger. And it can sometimes go into overdrive and sometimes be a little bit too much. And in the case of finances, it's trying to stop you from going broke, going destitute. That's the main thing. And the main reason that is in a place like Australia is that the risk is just so high. If you do make a mistake with your finances in Australia, you really can go bust. You can be out on the streets, even though there are some safety nets, especially when it comes to social programs and the dole and that sort of stuff. It's no fun to lose your job and your house with a massive mortgage and having to go on the dole, because starting from there is not easy. It's actually worse than starting from nothing in some cases. In Bali, the cost of disaster, when things go really wrong with your finances. God, these people are nice. They're the garbage guys. Even in Indonesia and in Bali, when things go wrong, the cost is not that significant because your sort of weekly running costs are so low, especially if you haven't committed to a big property or something like that. If you're just renting a place, a cheap place, and you're just going through your finances, and if everything goes wrong, what's the worst that can happen? Well, things don't really go wrong here in a big way, except when it comes to medical. So you do need to be covered on that. Then I think that's a huge source of anxiety for some people. So to ameliorate some of that anxiety related to health, you do need to have some health coverage with insurances and so forth. And if you don't have that, you're gonna need a big bank balance to cover you in case you have a heart attack or a stroke or something. But aside from that, the other big thing that can go wrong is that you run out of money somehow. I don't know how that would happen, but if you did, the worst case scenario is probably to go back to your home country with your tail between your legs and go and get a job at Bunnings or a hardware store or something like that. That would be the worst case scenario. And even that's not terrible. I mean, it's probably where you'd be at anyway if you stayed in your home country if things went bad. So it's actually not that big a deal. And when you realise that the risks here are far lower of things going wrong, some of that worry comes down a few notches. An example of that is that if your costs or your expenses here are a quarter of that, what they would be in your home country, Australia, for example, your savings go 4 times further. So when things go wrong, you've got 4 times as long to get back on your feet before it's total disaster. And now, that is a really big part of why that sort of anxiety and worry goes away. That's a nice little place as well. You get a little nasi campur there for 5,000 rupiah. It's cheap, isn't it? For me at my age, the backup plan has always been if things go really wrong here and I run out of money, that's not going to happen now by the way, but when I first got here, it was always that I can go back to Australia and do seasonal work, labouring work. Very menial, labour-driven work that pays well. It's hard work, physical work, but you can always get it in Australia, and you can definitely live on it. Like, you can live really well on it. You go and get a caravan out in the bush and work an agricultural job, like, you're fine. And most people can do that. I've met people in their 60s doing that quite easily. They do it for fun. You know, they travel around in their caravan and do seasonal work every now and then just to top up their bank balances so they can go on holiday for the rest of the year. When I moved to Indonesia, I actually moved with very little savings, very, very little savings. I mean, I'd owned a house previously in Australia that hadn't appreciated much. So I'd worked to pay off a mortgage on a house that I didn't get any benefit from an investment point of view. Unlike a lot of people these days seem to make a lot of money from housing, I didn't. I bought and sold it, bought high, sold low, that sort of scenario. So it really hurt me in a lot of ways, that house. And so I moved to Indonesia with not much. Here's the rubbish guys again. Lagi apa?
Ini lagi naikin.
Hello, my friend.
Sampah.
Rubbish.
Ah.
Who are you?
How are you? Or who are you? After I'd sort of settled into Indonesia and I was learning my language at a language school in Bandung in West Java initially, and I met my wife and we got married and all that sort of stuff, I made a commitment to Susan, my wife, that I was going to take her on a trip to Europe for 4 months, like a big trip where I was going to exhaust most of my savings. Hey! These rubbish guys following me around, what's going on there? But, exhausting my savings normally would just give me just complete anxiety. But in this case, it didn't. I'd already settled into Indonesia, and that whole worry thing had really taken care of itself, because I knew the worst case scenario is not that bad there. If I needed a few months to get back on my feet, I could just eat noodles and rice and a few veggies for 6 months if I needed to. Like, it's not a big deal in Indonesia to live really, really cheaply while you figure out what you're going to do next, whether you go and get a job somewhere, or whether you go and borrow money off someone, or do some remote work, or whatever it is that you're able to do to get yourself back on your feet again. The funny thing is, for me, what happened was that money sort of came to me. We're not talking big amounts of money, but we're talking amounts of money that are enough to live on in Indonesia. So I had little projects that I did around the place to earn money. Like, I did guidebook writing, for example, for a few years there as well. Give you a little bit of pocket money to get by. Not enough to live on in Australia. By no means at all could you live on that sort of money in Australia. But when you're in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia or Bali, you certainly can, and you can get by, and it can keep you going for another year or two. I also did seasonal work in Australia, where if you do one season of, in a cotton factory, a cotton gin, you might be able to live in Indonesia for several years. And so I guess the moral of the story is, or the bottom line is, I didn't really fix the worry here. I didn't fix it. I just moved somewhere that it couldn't really grab onto anything. There's nothing for it to grab onto anymore, and therefore it's not an issue. I know that if I ever went back to Australia and got a normal office job again and got a mortgage, I'd be back in that same place that I was before. I probably should talk about how that sort of transition for me worked. It wasn't like a switch necessarily where I arrived in Indonesia and everything's okay again. I actually brought a lot of my old ways across to Indonesia. I actually started off with that old spreadsheet again when I got to Indonesia, but I soon realised it's just useless, not even worth it, because I was spending nowhere near as much money as I had been in the past. There's no point tracking it. So what I did, I started a new method where I'd once a week go and withdraw a heap of money from the bank and put it in a wallet. That'd be like my master wallet. And then I'd take 400,000 rupiah out of that on a daily basis, about $45 I think it was at the time in Australian money. So I'd take the money out of there and then put it in my daily wallet. And over time, what I found was happening is that I wasn't spending my daily budget. It was building up, and I'd use it to pay for things like school fees and so forth, which happened I think once a month. And I'd have to pay for visas and so forth, but it was still more money than I needed to live there. And it was huge. The balance that I was sort of saving was huge. Just stopped into a place called Diddy's Warung, another one of these places in Sanur. Pretty simple. An iced latte here is 23,000 rupiah. Now that $45 a day, it adds up to about 15,000 Australian dollars a year is what I was sort of spending, which is not a lot of money. I had not much money. That was my budget, and I still didn't spend it all. And with that money, I was sort of at the end of the month, I'd have this pile of cash, and I'd go, okay, I'm going to buy Susan presents, for example, stuff that were important to her that she hadn't really been able to afford herself over the years. So I'd buy her and one of the things I used to do is go to the body shop and buy stuff from the body shop. She liked all that sort of stuff. And I think that sort of worry thing sort of gradually just went away by the fact that I wasn't needing to monitor my finances anymore. And as the months sort of go by, your brain's, the activity in your brain, sort of the noise sort of gets quieter and quieter and quieter until you actually forget that you used to worry about it. Really, it just became nothing. It's sort of the noise switched off. I know it's there because I know if I go back to Australia, I will worry about it, but it's gone now. So let's talk about what it looks like now for me. I don't use a spreadsheet at all anymore. I haven't opened that spreadsheet for probably, 10 years. But honestly, I haven't even looked at it. I think I did look at it just to see what I was doing, and it was ridiculous. But here's my iced coffee, thank you. The spreadsheet just doesn't matter anymore. I didn't need that to get ahead in life. And in fact, I find that my bank balance has accelerated faster than I ever could have imagined while I've been here in Indonesia. Honestly, I don't even know how. Because I haven't earned that much money, but just things, because you're not sort of spending much money. Any money that you do get sort of gets put away, and you do okay. Especially by Indonesian standards. I buy stuff now without worrying about it too much. I don't go and spend heaps of money, but if I go and buy a coffee, it's not even a thought about money at all. Whereas in the past, of course you don't worry about it, but it's in the back of your mind, if I do this every day for a whole year, it's going to cost me $2,000 and all that sort of stuff. I don't think about that at all anymore. I'll take a cab if it's hot, or get on the back of a motorbike if it's hot. The stake's not very high. Get a cab here, it costs you a couple of dollars. It's not like going from Sydney airport to the city and it costs you $100 because the cabbie's ripped you off. None of that sort of stuff matters because everything's pretty cheap anyway. I'm sure a lot of you have probably felt it who have been on holidays here in Bali. Even if you get ripped off, it's not the end of the world because it's not a lot of money usually, unless it's a housing deal. Running this channel, I get a bit get a bit worn out sometimes, so I put a lot of videos out. And one of the things I recently did was book to myself a holiday for Susan and I for our anniversary. We're going to Hong Kong and Taiwan, and only a short little trip. But there wasn't even a thought about the money aspect of it. It's not that, in the previous life it was a big deal, but and it wasn't that I couldn't afford it in the previous life. It's that internal negotiation that you sometimes have over money doesn't happen anymore. Like, you really notice it when you've got that worry out of your life, that financial anxiety. In the past, I would have had this umming and ahhing, can I really afford it? Maybe we should put it off for a little while, and that sort of stuff. Now, that's just not even a thing. So it's not just the coffees where that voice in your head goes away. It's even with more significant sort of expenses that you don't really have that anxiety anymore. I'm sure if I went and plonked, $500,000 down on a property here, I'd be pretty anxious about it. But for most of the stuff that I have to deal with, including rent and that sort of stuff, not even an issue. So the real point is, it's not just about, I'm doing things that I've always wanted to do, like going on holidays without thinking about it, but it's really like that mental bandwidth that you use up when you're stressed about something or anxious or worrying about something. That's all freed up now, and you just feel so much more relaxed. So just to sort of reiterate my personal circumstances, I'm not retired. So when you're retired, different kettle of fish. For me, my money's still just month to month when I can find bits of money here and there occasionally. And I do have supporters of the channel occasionally chipping in money, which really helps a lot. It really does help a lot. And if I need to, I can go to Australia and do seasonal work to get a bit of extra money to top up the bank account if I need to. It's not about being rich at all. It's about sort of lowering the stakes, lowering your cost base so that worry isn't so significant anymore. You're not going to get rich here in Bali by, making YouTube videos or whatever. It's not about getting rich. Most people don't get rich in Bali anyway. They're not even really working here. It's about lowering your cost base, and you lower your cost base so that worry doesn't have any fuel. If you see people here that are worried about finances in Bali or complaining that it's too expensive and stuff, they're usually people who have shifted their Australian or Western lifestyle across here, holus bolus, including the house they live in, buying premium products, imported ingredients, eating breakfast cereal imported from America, or imported steaks and that sort of stuff. If you have that sort of lifestyle here, I think it could be quite challenging and quite worrisome if you just bring everything you had from your previous life here. You bring the worry as well. Now, I want to say this really clearly. I'm not telling anyone to quit their job and all that. It's not one of those sorts of videos where quit your job and go and live overseas, you'll have a much better life. I'm not saying that at all. I'm only saying that it worked for me because the maths worked out, and I knew that if things went bad here, it wasn't that bad. I could always go back to Australia and do seasonal work. If you've got something like that you've got in your life that you can always have a backup on, living in a place like Indonesia or somewhere else in Southeast Asia really can make sense for you. Here are some top tips for the fellow money worrier. You won't be able to think your way out of this money worry. I tried for 30 years, didn't really work. Sometimes you can't fix a feeling, but you can change your environment, and that can really change the way you think about money and what the worry about money can latch onto. If you're at a low cost base, that worry can't really latch onto anything. So the question is not, how do I stop worrying about money? It's what would it take to make worrying about money unnecessary? For me, it's about going to a low cost of living place. Now, I know not everyone can move overseas and do what I've done, but the same sort of principles apply. When you've got high stakes, the worry and the stress is necessarily a lot higher. If you can lower the stakes a little bit, and that means things like downsizing, downscaling, uncluttering your life. Instead of living in a 4-bedroom house close to a city, go out to the bush and live in a 2-bedroom place. Like, if that's, what you're happy to do, that can really lower the stakes. Downsizing is something that a lot of people can do, free up a bit of cash and live a much better life if you're not able to go and live overseas. You've got to lower the stakes. So for me, it's pretty straightforward. I didn't get rich enough to stop worrying about this stuff, and I don't think getting rich enough is ever going to stop a person like me worrying about this sort of stuff. But what I did do is move somewhere where that worry can't really latch onto something. I reckon that's a pretty good piece of advice for most people. Whether you need to move overseas to do it or not, well, that's your own choice. Thanks for coming along for the ride today here in beautiful Sanur, Bali. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all things Sanur and the rest of Indonesia. I'll catch you next time and Sampai Jumpa.